Good morning and thanks for joining us on Face the State. I'm Dennis Sprague and I'm joined by Doug Mitchell. Doug's the Executive Director for the Glacier National Park Conservancy, commonly called the Glacier Conservancy. And we've talked with him before about the Sperry Chalet project. That's going to be our topic. And we're joined today by Amy Boring. Amy is with, I love this company name, A Boring Photo. And she's a special photographer working on this Sperry project. So we're going to get a chance to see some of the video and some of the still images that she's been taking following this project along. It's really nice to have people like Amy involved as this project's rolled out, right, Doug?
Yeah, no doubt. You know, as we've talked before, being able to be involved in this historic moment in Montana is really such a blessing. And one of the things we talked about is how do we make sure 100 years from now, when people look back at this, that they have curated parts of this experience so they can feel a part of it as well, really, which is what Sperry is all about, the sense of community. So Amy was willing to hike up there and work with the crew and spend a large part of her summer curating the photography of this. So 100 years from now, people are going to be looking at Amy Boring's photos.
That's fantastic.
And they're going to be able to be a part of this very historic time.
Because really, and we've talked about this before, there are precious little photographs of when Sperry Chalet was actually constructed in the first place. I don't know why that is. We just, you know, photos were hard to take back then, but there's not a lot of record here of the project originally, right?
Right. In fact, I went to the museum in Minneapolis where you can actually put your hands on the original drawings from Sperry Chalet and think what it might have been like back then. But it would be nice to have more photographs from that time period. And I think at the time, you know, when you're involved in something like this, it's hard to step back and think of it as being historic. Yeah. But every donor to this project is really part of building history, right? We're writing this history right now, and each of us is holding that pen. It's a very exciting time, Dennis.
That's a lot of extra pressure for you, Amy, taking these photos, thinking that 100 years from now, somebody could be looking at that and say, boy, I wish he had this or that angle, right? That makes a little extra pressure on you, doesn't it?
A little bit.
A little bit, exactly. Well, we'll get to the photos in a little bit. I want to recap just for a minute because if people are new or maybe they've forgotten how we got here with the Sperry Chalet rebuild. And of course, we had the Sprague fire in the fall there, August and into September of 2017. Fire burning on the west side of the park. I think it was about 4,000 some acres, if I recall.
Big fire.
Big fire. And of course, one of the things that happened is we got you know, the fire burning into that canyon where Sperry Chalet is at, and unfortunately set the chalet on fire, and specifically the roof, and kind of gutted the structure, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. You know, there were firefighters on the scene. They'd wrapped the wooden portions of Sperry. But as you say, it's in that canyon, and the embers from a very hot fire blew up and came underneath the eaves. So this is a fire that really started from the inside out. So by the time the folks on scene saw it, the inside of the building, mostly wood, had been consumed. So there was really nothing they could do at that point. And we really lost the dormitory building. Now, the other parts didn't burn, so it wasn't a complete loss. So last year we were able still to be able to serve folks food in the dining room, and the Sperry Experience really remains alive today.
And in that building, the thing that was important about the dormitory was we still had those rock walls. Those survived. But I know a year ago there was a year and a half ago, a lot of rush to try to get some bracings in there and to try to preserve that building so it could winter over. And I know about a year ago we started to get the photos, we started to get the aerial look at this thing, and every month it was like, yep, they're still up.
You know, it's one of the incredible things about Montanans and people who have visited the park, right? We have this kinship together, and within 24 hours, and without exaggeration, 24 hours, Sperry burned overnight. At 10 o'clock the next morning, my board chair and I were in the superintendent's office talking about how we could shore up the stone walls, which were standing by themselves, and they weren't going to survive 20 plus feet of snow, how we were going to shore those up that week. And by the end of that day, we literally had taken the credit card down to the hardware store in Columbia Falls and bought 6x6 timbers to be helicoptered up. And we could only do that because donors came through right away. 1,000 donors from all 50 states, multiple countries, who said this is important to us. And so we were able to respond very immediately to this. And really, now as we see it, right, that was a critical moment to be able to take that ruin and make it the foundation, literally the foundation of having Sperry Chalet dormitory rise from the ashes.
And that was very important because we didn't have a lot of season to finish that work. So that immediate start, that support from donors was critical to be able to save that and get that first winter over, right?
It was critical. We needed to, within a week, we needed $100,000+, which is not a small amount of money, right? The Conservancy generally gives between $1.5 million and $2 million to the park. So to think about $100,000 in a week was a big gulp for us. But it's really just about the donors, right? We couldn't have done it at the Conservancy. It was all people with, whether it's a $10 check or we had kids selling pumpkins literally in their driveway. All of that combined really is the power of what is Sperry. And it's the story of Sperry. It's a story of community coming together to do something very special.
So let's talk about, as we went in and recap kind of what's happened in this first construction season, construction, reconstruction, I never know what to call it. I guess it's a little of both, this last year. And Amy, how did you get involved and what kind of, got you interested in documenting this amazing reclamation project up there anyway?
Thanks for having me here, by the way. In the summer of 2017 was the first time I visited Glacier National Park and fell in love at first sight. Driving into the park, I drove past the Conservancy and out comes my mouth. I'm going to work with them. Nice. And that kind of shocked me because it just seemed out of reach. So the fire happened shortly thereafter. I went back down to Southern California, came back up with a goal and made it happen. Next thing I know, Doug and I are talking. Next thing I know after that, it's put in my lap and we just ran from there. Wow. And I learned really quickly how much it's about the people and really want to inspire not only Montanans, but all Americans to preserve and protect this beautiful place.
It really is
wonderful.
It's a remarkable thing, and we've talked about this before, Doug, that, in the National Park Service, there have been backcountry locations, different things. In some park areas, those disappeared over time, either through neglect or maintenance or policy decisions. So to have, Granite Chalet, to have Sperry, I mean, those are really touchstones for the history of this park. And down through generations of people as park visitors, right?
Right, and some of those have disappeared in our own park, right, in
Yes.
Glacier National Park, based upon the ability to maintain them, et cetera. So to have the community come together and share this value about these backcountry chalets, it really is very, very special. It's a unique experience. For folks who haven't had it, I really encourage you, this summer is the chance you have to see this history being made in front of your eyes. And there's two ways to get there. The trails are open. You can go the hard way, 6.4 miles from Lake McDonald. The superintendent and I did that last year. You can go the easy way, which is 13.1 miles over Gunsight. Either way, you're going to get greeted with lemonade and a cookie and a huge smile by Sperry. And that's the thing for 100 years that everyone tells the story of. We had a public meeting and I read part of a diary by Gladys Johnson, who in 1929, as a late teenager, came to Sperry Chalet. And the story she writes about is exactly the story that all of us have had within the last 5 years going to Sperry. And that's, I think, that sense of connectedness that makes it so special.
Let's start walking through some of these great photos that Amy's taken. Then I'm going to put the first one up on the screen. And Amy, this looks like a distant shot. Tell us a little bit about this first batch of photos here. This one obviously must be taken shortly after we got back in there this last summer, right? Or what's this shot here?
This was my first hike up with Kevin Warrington as we rounded the corner in the switchbacks. I was struggling a little bit, had some sweet blisters already, and he said, this is your first view of the chalet. And I couldn't see it. I pulled out my big lens and zoomed in. This is at 300 millimeters with my camera. And we still had a little ways to go.
I like this shot because it really shows this interesting location that they picked for Sperry to be right there perched on the edge of that cliff, that scenery that goes out below you, but then how it is really in that cirque up there. So it's a special place, isn't it?
It is. It's really spectacular and very special.
Now this next shot actually shows as you got up in there, and one thing you've had a chance to do is get to know so many of the construction folks from Jackson, or from
Dick Anderson,
right, working on this project. When you got in here, were you kind of surprised the amount of complexity already that was starting to take shape as you got on site?
Yes, it was overwhelming when I got up to the site the first time. I didn't enter the building. These were shot through the windows. It wasn't a safe place to be. Structurally, they weren't really sure. It had lasted the winter, so that was a good sign. But they were very protective
Yeah.
of the scene,
That's
understandably.
Great. Well, and at this point, it was a critical part of it too, wasn't it, Doug, to make sure that everything was secure. Are we ready to go ahead with the actual work inside, right?
Right. Health and safety, obviously a critical issue, and as we talk about Sperry for the next 100 years, that was key. You'll have seen in that photo that it's still a dirt floor, right? And so part of that was we're going to have to put a foundation, Sperry's first kind of foundation in place. And so some of this will be the Sperry from 1913, but with some health and safety additions.
And I love this next shot, Amy. This is people aren't the only people that are regular visitors to Sperry, right? Tell us
Correct.
about this goat.
The goats moved in.
I love this.
They were very protective.
Yes.
They met me at the door, and I watched in awe and stayed out of their way as directed by the Park Service.
There's a little extra supervisor on scene, right?
The site inspectors, I think,
Yes,
is what the Anderson
exactly.
folks call them.
I like the fact that he's actually, construction zone, do not enter. It's almost like he's on patrol right
He
there.
walked from across the other side of the building. I could see him, and as I walked up the ramp, he just stood his ground and let
Did
it be
his part.
known who was boss.
Now, this next shot we're looking at, this is actually, it looks like a little further along when some of the framing work is actually happening. When was this taken? Tell us about this.
This is after I got past the gatekeeper. They had the floor installed and the temporary interior walls.
And Doug, tell me about this a little bit. We don't, we think about the big beams and the roof and those things, but this is part of that. Really, there's quite a bit of work going on inside too, isn't there? As
Right.
part of this.
And in fact, now that it's enclosed, really it has a first floor and a second floor, and it has framing on the sides. And now this phase two, and I know we'll get to that a little bit later, but the phase two is then going to strip pieces of that out, right? These are temporary floors. They'll put in the permanent floors, and they're going to restore the rock so then they can remove the framing and have the original rock exterior visible in the interior as well.
This next shot Amy has too shows a lot of that bracing that had to be placed outside as we got in this early part, right? That's what we're looking at here.
You bet.
And one of the things too that people don't realize, and either one of you can speak to this, is all of this lumber and materials has to get on site. And that's not the easiest thing. There's a couple of ways to do that, right, Doug, that's been happening?
Right, so as I described earlier, the hard way is 6.4 miles, and that's a mule train, and that happened regularly to get products, food, up to Sperry Chalet. The other way is helicopters, and everyone wanted to be very respectful of helicopter use in the national park, particularly as it relates to wildlife, et cetera, and visitor experience. So they did that really very sensitively, but so those are the two ways that the stuff got there.
Exactly. Everything's got to go up the mountain. And this shot, Amy, looks like we're looking at more of that interior work, right, inside?
Correct. The second floor had been installed at this point, so we were starting to see rooms develop on the ground floor at the north end.
One of the things Amy did here too is took a wonderful time lapse. We'll put this on here where it actually shows how this has been coming together, and again all that work, and this is very similar, Doug, to actually almost as if you were starting with a new building as far as that interior work, right?
Right, so Anderson Hallis Architects, who are one of the leading architecture firms in the country in terms of historical architecture in national parks, and they helped do the Many Glacier Hotel renovation recently. Really did start from the bottom up with what everyone now agrees was a ruin. That at the end of the day, all we had was a ruin of historic stone walls, and really had to start from the beginning. Making sure, though, that we kept to the 1913 as-built plans as closely as they could.
It's a good thing we had those plans for reference because, like you said, not a lot of photographic evidence, so you really have to go back to those original blueprints, right?
Right, and those came out of that the Minneapolis Museum, and it really is great to have kind of that whole railroad history right at our fingertips. to be able to go back that far.
And this next shot we're going to throw in here takes a look at the, of course, that iconic Glacier National Park piece of this, which I think for a lot of people that's the signpost, really, isn't it? To say, I'm in the park. This is a part of the park's legacy, right?
Yeah, no doubt. So, the Great Northern Railroad, branded the end of this. They were the builders of this, and they were the first operators of Sperry. And the second operators are the current operators of Sperry. Kevin Warrington, who I know that Amy got to spend a lot of time with this year and who's become a dear friend of mine. His grandmother, Kay Luting, was the first concessionaire at Sperry after the railroad. So that's another part of this history. Everywhere you turn, you have just more and more history and this investment of families in this experience that's very special.
Amy, tell me, this distance shot that we have here as you're looking down on Sperry, what's been fascinating to you as you've watched this sort of come together in recording this and catching all these photos and video last summer?
It changed really quickly. Also that it was definitely a burn area site. You can see that there are burn areas, but there are also areas that are still alive and well, which I found really fascinating, because when you think a fire has blown through, you think everything is going to be decimated. But there was plenty of wildlife, plenty of flowers, plenty of greenery, and it was just as stunning, I think, as if nothing had happened.
And that, of course, shows that fire on the landscape, how we are here in the Northern Rockies and what happens, and also shows the speed that fire was moving when it came through there. Here's another shot of the interior walls, I guess, right, Amy? Is this some of that extensive framing work there?
Yes.
And you can see a lot of the work. The weather was fairly cooperative, wasn't it, Doug, as we went through last summer?
Yeah, we had a pretty good run until another fire
too.
Right?
Yeah.
And people will have noted on that last photograph the beams that are there, and those are from a company from Hamilton, and they have a steel insert. Again, it's one of those, we're going to stick to the original wooden beam, but we're going to upgrade it with a steel insert to, again, provide for a little bit more stout roof treatment. So that was really cool, particularly to have it built right here in Montana.
Yeah, I like that kind of connection. Here, this next shot shows one of the workers up on top of the actual thing. Amy, they spend a lot of time up there, up high, don't they, as they try to accomplish this stuff?
They did. These men and women really had their work cut out for them, and it was amazing to watch them. It was unbelievable. Very steady, very quick.
Yeah.
They knew what they were doing, that's for sure.
You need to have experts when you're working at that kind of elevation, especially. And this movie here, this log drop, tell me a little bit about what that was involved. Is this the beams coming in that were from Hamilton, or just what?
I believe so. This day was spectacular, probably one of the most impressive days up on the mountain. The helicopter operator just dropped these logs with such precision, and they just went one after the next, and we were fighting with the weather, we were waiting, it was go time, and they just knocked it out. It was absolutely incredible to watch.
And that's something too, people don't realize, helicopter operations, as you go up in elevation, it takes a little more skill to be able to do something at 6,000 plus feet or 7,000 feet, and of course they have a higher approach coming in with those things. Another shot here showing them how they're dropping in those beams there. Now, with this work done, Doug, with these beams and stuff, most of the work, I'm assuming, this coming year will be more interior finishing. What do we kind of see on the plans this year?
Right. So the goal was get a roof on by the time the snow flies, and all of us, I will admit, were a little skeptical that might happen, but it did, and it was really a tribute to both the government, who really worked super hard to get all of the permitting in place appropriately, the public, who provided public funds or private funds for this, and the construction crew. Dick Anderson's crew did an amazing job. So now a little bit of this is going to be deconstruction. We're going to take the roof off, and take some walls out. We're going to redo the pointing on the stone, and then really set about finishing the project so that in September, October of this year, they can hand the keys back to the concessionaire, Kevin Warrington, and say, it's all yours.
It's all yours. It's turnkey, ready to go. I love this shot you've got here, Amy. Now, is this looking, I'm assuming, back down the valley? So this kind of gives you an idea of the climb up, or just what?
Right. At this point, I had built a pretty solid rapport with the construction crew, and I made a offhanded joke how I wanted to climb a scaffolding, and the next thing I knew, they had permission to hook me into a harness and get me up. I was white knuckled the whole time. I was only 2 levels up. I didn't stay long, but it was an incredible moment.
This crew that we have working on, I mean, it's just, I know both of you have told me stories, and I've talked with Jeff Mao, the park superintendent, too, and he's talked to me about how they really saw this as an adventure, didn't they? To be up there working on this special project and this kind of historical aspect of things, too, right, Doug?
Jeff and I had the privilege of shaking each of their hands when they got off the helicopter the first day, and really this was an amazing, you could see them taking in the bigness of this enterprise which they were going to be involved in. And I think as you watched them be in community with each other and hike in and out every week, you know, we saw some great stats about people who are hiking in 3 hours the first of the summer and 1 hour and 40 minutes by the end, right? People got in shape, they had a great time. It was neat to see them all pull together.
You've talked about this before, Doug, and we've talked about this, but this next shot, I think, just captures this location. And it's almost a sacred place, wouldn't you say, Amy? I mean,
yes,
when you
absolutely.
look at that, do you have those kinds of feelings when you see it, or just what?
I do. The vastness of this space is just full circle. No matter which way you look, is unbelievable that people would think to put something like this on the edge of a cliff.
It's just that remarkable pioneer spirit in a way, you know, back in those days, that was the way to enjoy it. And the railroad did a great job of hey, we've got this natural wonder. And you think about it too, Glacier, I don't think, would have the legacy and everything that we have today if it had not been for those pioneers and that entrepreneurship that said, hey, let's give people a way to enjoy the park, right?
Right, see America first, right? That was the slogan of the railroad, and you might come out for the whole summer. Yeah. And you would spend some time at Mini Glacier, and you would go to Two Medicine, and you would go into the Sun Chalet, and you would go to Sperry and Lake McDonald, and that would be your summer vacation as a visitor from the east. And I think it did a lot of things, right? It opened up the West. It was clearly good for the railroad as they were working on it, and I think it gave us those iconic experiences that really bring people back still today.
And gave Glacier, I always say this, one thing about Glacier, because of that connection, Yellowstone to some extent too, is that European tourism feel. You know, that these visitors, it was like, America's got to have these kinds of destinations that you saw in the Alps and things like that, go to Switzerland. And so that marketing aspect of thing was a big part of this. And you look around the Park Service now, there's a handful of other places maybe, but really Glacier is at the forefront of that kind of experience today.
It's a completely unique experience, and it was when the superintendent and I were up there was a hiker who came in from the gun sight and hike, and he didn't know there was a chalet there, and to see his face when he saw, and he's European, to see this, it was like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? This is so incredible, right? So I think it's that kind of surprise that is really, really interesting.
I want to slip in another one of Amy's clips here. This is the helicopter flyover. Is this the one toward the end here, Amy, or what's kind of the timing on that?
Yes, the timbers had been placed. I had just climbed down off the scaffolding and came down, and they were there was a crew shift change, and they had invited me to ride in the helicopter. Now, if you had asked me at the beginning of the summer if I wanted to ride in the helicopter, I would have said no thanks, because I'm not big on small aircraft. But after sitting underneath this pilot dropping these logs filled with steel,
you wanted to see the other
I was
side
not afraid at all. So I grabbed my stuff and I sat in the front seat and
had a front row seat.
And was able to get some aerial footage that, you know, Gravity Shots wasn't able to get at that time. Yeah. So it was nice to be able to fill in that hole.
We want to mention Gravity Shots too, because they've gotten some really nice aerial shots, especially from the winter months and those things too, and help sort of log that other aspect of it when it's not really accessible too. So
right, you know, in the summer we knew what was happening every day.
Yeah.
In the winter, particularly when we had taken these 6x6 20-foot long bracings, there was a lot of nervous energy about what this was going to look like when we went up in the air. So Adele and Gravity Shots really did a remarkable job of keeping that current for us, and more important, making sure the planning was on track. Like right now, the architects are planning on the building being in the shape that they left it. So we're still doing those, and you can go on glacier.org and see those every month, because if for some unforeseen circumstance a roof edge were to go away, it's important for us to know that now, because we're spending money today based upon some things that we think exist. So that's part of the reason we're doing that, Dennis.
Let's talk about fundraising. A couple of minutes, 3 minutes or so left here. This is still a big part of this, right? We're still a very active fundraising mode to finish off this project, right, Doug?
Right. We committed to a public-private partnership. Secretary Zinke came to our office. He said, "I'm gonna go and work hard and get the federal money for this," which he did in record time. And without that, we would not be where we are today. But he asked at the same time, "I need a private partner, and I want you to say yes." And we do what we do when the park asks for help, which is we say yes. But we can only do that because of donors. And people came together in record numbers to support this last year. We committed to around $600,000. We were able to meet that goal. We expect we've already committed to opening up the food service again this year, both to hikers and visitors, as also to feed the workers, and also to continue this historic project of keeping a record of it. So with that and some additional construction costs, we're probably looking to raise an additional $500,000 or $600,000 this year. We're going to be really clear with donors about what that's for, because they need to know that that's really going to the end result of putting Sperry back on the map.
And I understand, Amy, we're going to get a chance to have some of these great images as part of a fundraiser, right?
I did. I put a couple images up on my website under the store function, and the proceeds will go to the Conservancy to do with what they wish.
So a little bit of Sperry you can put on your put on the wall at home, right?
Yes, and I definitely want to encourage people to become a friend of Glacier or obtain a piece of artwork from me. It doesn't take a lot to accrue a good substantial amount of money very quickly. So we've seen that in recent events lately, and I think it's very possible to do that here.
And what's the website there, and is that linked from the Glacier Conservancy page, or give us some places to look for that?
I'm not sure if it's linked to the Conservancy page at this point, but aboringphoto.com.
Great, good. And of course, we always want to encourage folks, Doug, to go to the Conservancy website, all of the projects of Sperry and everything going on.
Right, 64 other projects this year. In addition to Sperry, glacier.org is where you can find out about that. We also do have a Sperry-specific microsite, which is Sperry Action Fund, but you can go to Glacier and just find your way through to that. And we are always posting Amy's pictures, other things that are happening at Sperry and throughout the park.
Great. Well, it's a wonderful Montana project, and we wish everybody the best for season number 2. And please, if you get a chance, go to the websites, support this project, and get a chance to get up there if you can and watch this icon come back to life. I want to thank Doug Mitchell and Amy Boring for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us on Face the State.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.